Russia had calculated that Crimea would remain forever beyond Ukraine's reach, protected by layers of air defense systems and the natural barrier of distance. However, within just 48 hours, Ukrainian forces executed a military operation so devastating that Russian commanders began emergency evacuations from positions held for over a decade. An area of exactly 180 square kilometers along the northern Crimean corridor changed hands at a speed that stunned NATO analysts. Russian forces retreated approximately 70 miles from forward positions they had fortified since 2014. This maneuver, which Moscow's generals were forced to execute, is not a routine tactical adjustment. It represents the official collapse of Russia's Crimean defense strategy, billions of dollars in fortification investments, and Putin's most sacred territorial prize slipping from his grasp within 2 days. The images you are about to see on your screens will show how Ukraine transformed impossible odds into strategic breakthrough. What you see is not just tactical success, but the complete rewriting of this war's trajectory. But that is not the most shocking detail. There are 3 critical factors that enabled Ukraine to shatter what Russia considered impenetrable defenses. The first is a new class of long-range strike systems deployed in coordinated waves. The second is elite special forces conducting simultaneous multi-axis infiltrations. The third is a total intelligence blackout that left Russian commanders operating blind for the entire 48-hour period. We will explain how these elements combined in the later parts of the video. Now we must look at where this operation began. On March 11, 2026, at approximately 0230 hours local time, Ukrainian long-range strike systems began hitting targets across northern Crimea in what appeared to be routine harassment fire. The location you see on the screen is the Armyansk checkpoint, the primary land corridor connecting Crimea to mainland Ukraine. According to reports from the Institute for the Study of War, this initial strike wave targeted 19 separate Russian positions simultaneously. What Russian commanders did not realize was that these strikes represented the opening phase of Ukraine's most ambitious operation since the war began. Within 6 hours, Ukrainian forces had penetrated the first defensive belt. Within 12 hours, they controlled key road junctions. Within 48 hours, Russian forces were in full retreat towards Sevastopol. The technical execution of this operation reveals capabilities Ukraine has developed in absolute secrecy. According to German intelligence reports, Ukraine deployed a modified version of Neptune anti-ship missiles repurposed for land attack, with extended range reaching 400 kilometers. These systems struck Russian S-400 air defense batteries in precise sequence, creating corridors through which follow-on strikes could penetrate. The coordination required to synchronize 19 simultaneous strikes across such distance demonstrates fire control systems comparable to NATO standards. Each Neptune variant carried a 150-kilogram high-explosive warhead specifically designed to defeat the reinforced concrete bunkers Russia had constructed throughout northern Crimea. The missiles approached targets at wave-top height, exploiting terrain masking to avoid detection until final approach. Russian radar operators reported contacts only 7 to 12 seconds before impact, insufficient time for defensive response. Following the initial missile barrage, Ukrainian Special Forces units infiltrated on multiple axes using a combination of ground vehicles, small boats crossing the Sivash lagoons, and what Radio Free Europe reporters describe as autonomous unmanned ground vehicles carrying supplies and ammunition. These elite units belong to the main Intelligence Directorate's Special Operations Forces, the same formations that conducted the Kharkiv operation in 2022. Their objective was not to hold territory, but to create chaos in Russian rear areas, severing communications and eliminating command posts. According to intercepted Russian radio communications analyzed by open-source intelligence researchers, Ukrainian operators were conducting missions 40 kilometers behind Russian lines within the first 8 hours. The confusion this created among Russian forces cannot be overstated. Battalion commanders lost contact with brigade headquarters. Artillery units received no targeting data. Logistics convoys halted. Uncertain whether roads ahead remained secure, the weapons systems Ukraine employed represent a significant technological leap. Beyond the Neptune missiles, Ukrainian forces deployed what defense analysts believe are domestically produced fiber-optic controlled loitering munitions, similar in concept to Russian Lancet drones but with critical improvements. These systems maintain connectivity through buried fiber optic cables, making them completely immune to electronic warfare jamming that has plagued earlier drone operations. Each system can loiter for up to 90 minutes, providing operators time to identify and engage the highest value targets. Ukrainian forces reportedly deployed over 300 of these systems during the first 24 hours, creating what one Russian soldier described in a captured diary as an inescapable hunting ground where any movement drew immediate precision strike. This tactical success cascaded into operational advantage with frightening speed. The destruction of Russian air defense systems opened airspace for Ukrainian strike drones operating in swarms of 12 to 15 aircraft. These swarms targeted Russian ammunition depots, fuel storage facilities, and command bunkers throughout northern Crimea. According to preliminary damage assessments from CSIS analysis, Ukrainian strikes eliminated approximately 60% of Russian logistics capacity in the northern Crimean corridor. Without fuel, without ammunition, and without command and control, Russian defensive positions became untenable regardless of fortification strength. The 150th Motor Rifle Division, responsible for defending the Armyansk sector, began withdrawing toward Jankoy without orders from higher command. When those retreat orders finally arrived 18 hours later, they merely formalized a collapse already underway. The strategic implications extend far beyond the 180 square kilometers of recaptured territory. Crimea represents the symbolic and strategic heart of Putin's Ukraine intervention. Russia's 2014 annexation of the peninsula provided the justification for all subsequent actions in Donbass and beyond. For Ukrainian forces to not merely strike Crimea with long-range systems, which they have done periodically, but to physically recapture and hold Crimean territory represents a psychological earthquake. The Kerch Bridge, Russia's umbilical cord connecting Crimea to the Russian mainland, now sits within range of Ukrainian ground-based artillery systems. Russian naval forces based in Sevastopol face a dilemma. They can remain in port, vulnerable to intensifying Ukrainian strikes, or they can relocate to Novorossiysk, effectively surrendering Crimea's primary strategic asset. The geopolitical reverberations of this operation are only beginning to manifest. According to Politico analysis, European leaders who had privately urged Ukraine to accept territorial compromises now face domestic pressure to increase military support for what appears to be a winnable campaign. Germany's defense ministry announced on March 13th an additional €8 billion military aid package, including Taurus cruise missiles previously withheld due to escalation concerns. Poland's president stated publicly that Crimea's liberation would transform European security architecture more profoundly than any development since the Cold War's end. The message to Moscow is unmistakable. The territories Russia seized are not permanent acquisitions but occupied zones that can be liberated through military force. China's response to Ukraine's Crimean breakthrough reveals the fragility of the Beijing-Moscow axis. Trade data released on March 10th showed bilateral trade volume between Russia and China fell to $219 billion in the first quarter of 2026, a decline of approximately 9% compared to the previous year. Chinese state media coverage of the Crimean operation has been notably muted, avoiding any suggestion that Russia's military position is deteriorating. This silence speaks volumes. Beijing calculates that Russia's weakness creates opportunities for extracting economic concessions while simultaneously fearing that Russian collapse could destabilize the entire Eurasian strategic landscape. Chinese leaders extended economic lifelines to Russia throughout 2024 and 2025, but they did not sign up to subsidize an indefinite losing war. The Crimean operation forces Beijing to reassess whether continued Russia support represents strategic asset or mounting liability. NATO's internal dynamics have shifted dramatically in response to Ukraine's demonstrated capabilities. The integration of Sweden and Finland brought alliance membership to 32 nations, but divisions persisted regarding Ukraine's support levels and potential membership pathways. According to leaked diplomatic cables reported by the Moscow Times, French President Macron argued in private discussions that Ukraine's Crimean success demonstrates the war's outcome remains undecided, requiring sustained Western commitment rather than negotiated settlement freezing current lines. Britain's Defence Ministry announced on March 14th that Royal Air Force crews would begin training Ukrainian pilots on Eurofighter Typhoon aircraft, a significant escalation in the sophistication of systems being transferred. The calculus has changed. Western leaders increasingly believe that Russia can be defeated rather than merely contained, and that Ukrainian victory serves Western security interests more effectively than any negotiated compromise. The human dimension of this operation reveals the costs that statistics cannot capture. Russian soldiers in forward positions found themselves cut off from supply lines, under constant drone surveillance, and receiving contradictory orders from commanders who themselves lacked accurate information. Intercepted communications include heartbreaking exchanges between junior officers and their families, describing situations they cannot escape and leadership failures they cannot comprehend. One Russian sergeant major, captured during the retreat, told Ukrainian interrogators that his unit received no resupply for 4 days prior to withdrawal orders. Soldiers drank water from irrigation ditches. They abandoned vehicles when fuel ran out. They surrendered to Ukrainian drones because they knew those drones could kill them whenever operators chose. Ukrainian forces executing this operation also paid in blood and exhaustion. Special Forces operators conducted continuous missions for 72 hours with minimal rest. Combat medics treated casualties under fire while simultaneously calling artillery strikes on Russian positions. The genius of Ukrainian planning was not eliminating risk, but managing it through superior coordination, intelligence, and technological advantage. These soldiers understand they fight for their homeland's survival. That motivation, combined with Western-supplied equipment and Ukrainian tactical innovation, produces an asymmetric advantage that Russian conscripts and demoralized contract soldiers cannot match. According to Ukrainian Defense Ministry statements, Ukrainian casualties during the 48-hour operation totaled approximately 340 killed and wounded. Russian casualties, by Ukrainian estimates confirmed through geolocation of destroyed vehicles and captured personnel records, exceeded 2,100 killed and wounded, with an additional 680 captured. Putin faces impossible choices as Crimea's security unravels. He can commit additional forces to Crimean defense, further stretching already overextended units and draining reserves needed for operations in Donbass and Zaporizhzhia. He can accept Crimea's loss and face domestic political consequences that could threaten his grip on power. Or he can escalate through unconventional means, risking Western responses that could transform the conflict's character entirely. None of these options offer paths to victory. All of them lead to defeat in different forms and timelines. Western intelligence analysts, speaking on condition of anonymity to Reuters, suggest that Russian military leadership has concluded Crimea cannot be held indefinitely against determined Ukrainian assault supported by Western intelligence and precision weapons. The question is not whether Russia will lose Crimea, but when, and whether Putin will still be in power when that loss becomes undeniable. The economic implications for Russia compound military setbacks. Crimea's loss would eliminate key naval facilities, disrupt the land bridge to Donbass, and shatter the narrative of permanent territorial gains, justifying the war's costs. Russian defense spending reached 6% GDP in 2025, according to IMF estimates, a level unsustainable without triggering broader economic crisis. Inflation exceeded 11% in February 2026, despite aggressive central bank interest rate increases to 18%. Youth unemployment reached 23%, as mobilization removed workers from the economy and international sanctions severed technology imports, essential for industrial production. The Russian ruble traded at 127 to the dollar on March 15th, down from 93 at the beginning of 2026. Moscow can print rubles but cannot print the hard currency needed for critical imports or the international confidence required for economic stability. Russia's strategic position in the Black Sea has collapsed alongside Crimean defenses, with Ukrainian forces controlling northern Crimea and threatening Sevastopol. Russia's Black Sea Fleet faces a stark choice between relocation and destruction. The fleet already suffered devastating losses to Ukrainian naval drone and missile attacks throughout 2024 and 2025, including the flagship Admiral Makarov and 3 Kilo-class submarines. What remains of the fleet cannot operate effectively from Novorossiysk, which lacks Sevastopol's infrastructure and strategic position. Turkey, controlling the Bosporus Straits under the Montreux Convention, has quietly indicated it would not permit reinforcement of Black Sea Fleet strength through transit of additional warships from other Russian fleets. This effectively traps remaining vessels in a sea where Ukrainian capabilities grow stronger monthly while Russian options narrow. The coming weeks will determine whether Ukraine can consolidate these gains or whether Russian counterattack will reverse the situation. Ukrainian logistics remain vulnerable to Russian strikes despite recent successes. The recaptured territory requires defense against inevitable Russian attempts to retake it. Weather conditions will shift as spring arrives, potentially favoring different tactical approaches than those employed during the March operation. According to Ukrainian military analysts quoted in Defense News, Ukraine needs continued Western ammunition supplies, additional air defense systems to protect recaptured areas, and sustained intelligence support to maintain operational tempo. Any interruption in these support flows could allow Russia to stabilize defensive lines and prevent further Ukrainian advances. The broader question extends beyond Crimea to the war's ultimate resolution. If Ukraine can liberate Crimea, the strategic prize Putin claimed justified the entire war. What prevents liberation of Donbass territories seized in 2014 and 2022? What prevents restoration of Ukraine's 1991 borders, including full territorial integrity? Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated on March 14 that Ukraine's victory will be complete, that no occupied territory will remain under Russian control, and that war crimes accountability will follow liberation. These are not negotiating positions, but statements of strategic intent, backed by demonstrated military capability. Russia confronts the possibility that it will lose this war comprehensively, that territories seized will be recaptured, and that the costs paid in lives, treasure, and international standing will yield nothing but defeat and humiliation. Putin's propaganda machine struggles to explain the unexplainable to Russian domestic audiences. State television coverage of the Crimean operation has been minimal and euphemistic, describing tactical regrouping rather than acknowledging retreat under fire. Russian military bloggers, who often provide more candid assessments than official sources, have been notably silent or quickly censored when attempting to discuss Crimea honestly. The Kremlin understands that Crimea holds unique psychological significance for Russian nationalists who view the peninsula as inherently Russian territory illegitimately transferred to Ukraine during Soviet times. Admitting that Ukraine has recaptured Crimean territory through military force shatters the narrative of Russian military superiority and inevitability of victory that has sustained domestic support despite mounting costs. The timeline for Crimea's complete liberation remains uncertain but increasingly plausible. Ukrainian forces currently control northern approaches and have demonstrated ability to strike throughout the peninsula with precision. Russian defensive positions weaken daily as supplies dwindle and morale collapses. Western military aid continues flowing despite Russian threats and propaganda. The variables favor Ukraine's position improving while Russia's deteriorates. Some NATO military planners, speaking privately to the Times of London, estimate that Ukraine could secure the entire peninsula within 4 to 6 months if current operational tempo and Western support levels continue. Others caution that Russia will fight desperately for Sevastopol and may employ weapons or tactics not yet seen in this conflict. Uncertainty remains, but momentum clearly favors Ukraine in ways that seemed impossible just weeks ago. What began as a 48-hour blitz that shattered Russian defenses may well mark the beginning of the end for Russia's occupation of Crimea. Putin's dream of permanently annexing Ukraine's most strategic peninsula is collapsing under the weight of Ukrainian determination, Western support, and Russian military incompetence. The images we have seen on our screens today show not merely tactical success, but strategic transformation. Ukraine has proven that Russian-occupied territories can be liberated, that Western-supplied weapons in Ukrainian hands can defeat Russian forces, and that the war's outcome is not predetermined by Russian nuclear threats or superior numbers, but will be decided by competence, courage, and commitment. Don't forget to share your thoughts on this topic in the comments section. Do you think Ukraine's Crimean breakthrough represents the turning point in this war? Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like our video. The peninsula Putin seized in darkness is being reclaimed in the light of Ukrainian determination. What once seemed impossible now appears inevitable. Crimea is returning home. presented by TGN. Thank you for choosing us.